it's just not under the surface anymore. All of these kind of multiple oppressions and the ways that our actions are harming and that we're feeding that harm, like it's just everywhere. Like it's kind of impossible to avoid. There's vast injustices, all of which require organising, community building, transforming ourselves and the assumptions inside of us, as well as transforming other people's opinions about these things. Like, we need to talk to people that we're not used to talking to and grow a friendship with someone unexpected and start thinking about who your community is.
Hello, dear friends. Thank you for being here. If you have been moved or inspired by any of our recent episodes this series, would you please take the time to write us a review on Apple Podcasts? The reviews really help new people find the podcast, and from there, what is shared here becomes more prevalent and culture change happens. Reviews also make our lovely and very dedicated team smile. We are now entering the final week of our course From Me to We. Our session on engaged activism was powerful, and now we move into embodying all that we are with guests Matt Mccartney, Nina Simons, and Richard Rudd. You are still welcome to join us and catch up on the previous weeks in your own time, or to join for this final speaker session. The episodes of the podcast with these three guests have been really popular ones as they share stories of their own becoming and the creation of Mbecum, Bioneers, and the Gene Keys. This week, we will be exploring the questions: how do we embody a spirituality of wholeness and innate worth as we live in the complexity of now? What is all that we are? And for those of you in London or nearby, do join us for our picnic on Hampstead Heath on Saturday, 18th of June. You will meet some wonderful people and we will share stories, songs and food. I have a little surprise planned too, where we'll be in relationship with the beautiful trees of the Heath. This is the kind of thing you can come to on your own and leave with new friends, or come with a few friends or your family. Please visit our events page on allthatweare.org to register. You just need to get yourself a ticket. There's a small donation that goes towards the making of the podcast, and a discounted rate, of course, for All That We Are members. This episode has been a long time coming, as it is the 10-year anniversary of the publication of our book, which was released as The Future We Choose at the Rio+20 climate talks in 2012, and Tamsin Omond was one of the contributors. With the rise of transphobic media, I hope that this episode will also offer you a different understanding of gender. My guest is the wonderful Tamsin Omond. Since dropping banners against Heathrow Airport's third runway from the roof of the Houses of Parliament, Tamsin has consistently shifted public conversation on the climate and ecological emergency. They have organised a number of high-profile protests, co-founded a suffragette-inspired environmental campaign, Climate Rush, coordinated the successful Save England's Forest Coalition, founded a CIC, the Momentum Project, that mobilises the community surrounding London City Airport, led global corporate campaigns as head of global campaigns at Lush Cosmetics, and been a founding member of Extinction Rebellion. In 2021, Tamsin stood for co-leadership of the Green Party of England and Wales. They are also active in Queer Uprising, a theatre maker and the author of 2 books, Rush, The Making of a Climate Activist, and Do Earth, Healing Strategies for Humankind. In this conversation, entitled Creative Action, we explore the themes of climate activism, invisible identities, and liberation, where we speak to the question, how can you be an activist in a world of crisis? I hope that you enjoy this conversation and that it inspires your future. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration. The spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Tamsin, I am delighted to welcome you to this podcast. It feels like it's been a long time coming that we got to sit down and share some stories. Before I ask you our first question, which we ask everyone, I'm just reminded that it is quite close to the end of May 2022. And when I last saw you, which was at the Rise Up talks, which were happening during COP in November, we did talk about you riding naked through London on a horse in May 2022.
Was that a promise that I made? I have no memory of this promise.
I think it was something I suggested many times and thought was going to happen somehow.
You know what? If you find me a horse before the end of May that I can ride naked through London on, am I willing to promise that I will? If I could wear some pants, like I'm not sure actually how much I feel okay about sitting without anything between me and the horse on a horse's back. I just don't think that's fair to me or the horse. So yeah, I guess topless. I'm so excited about doing many things topless. Actually, I should explain that I've had top surgery fairly recently, and I don't know quite why whatever gender rules exist around showing bosoms for people who identify as women. But I think now that I don't have any bosoms, I'm allowed to be a bit topless. I think I'm going to experiment it with this summer. I'm not like a super body confident person, but I think maybe I made that promise because actually I was very recently out of surgery when we saw each other in November, and I was probably feeling very excited about all of the opportunities for showing off my new body, my true body. And I imagine that's why I was so willing to ride a horse. So if you can bring me a horse, Amisha, then
I'll look into it. I'll ask the Queen or something if she could lend us a horse.
Yeah, I think they've got so many horses, don't they, at the barracks and places like that. It's very posh horses.
And so some of the context as well was that we were in Coventry and Lady Godiva rode naked through Coventry, and we were talking about some of the big actions, or what would you call them?
The iconic moments, maybe.
The iconic moments where you are able to make a point and make a stand for something. You have been a friend of iconic moments. So this seemed like a really apt one, especially in celebration of your top surgery.
Brilliant. Can I just say that it's so nice to be here? Honestly, I do feel like you said, this has been in the orbit for a very, very long time, and we haven't quite managed to sit down and go wherever this conversation will take us. And we just started the conversation. I don't know if this is like something that you don't want other people to know about, Amisha. Like one of your trade secrets. But we just started with like a moment of stillness together, which I have been on a lot of podcasts and I have never enjoyed a moment of stillness before the podcast with the person that's hosting the podcast, and just feels so good. It feels like quite visionary. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all of our conversations began just with a moment of stillness and kind of intention setting for it? I just, honestly, everybody that's listening already knows this, but you're just so ahead of the curve. You know, you're like you have forever been practicing the things that like the movement maybe hasn't quite yet been ready to do, and then 3 years later suddenly everyone's doing it, and it's like, yeah, no, Amisha knew this.
Yeah, it's quite a tiring path being 3 years ahead. But yeah, when you said, I don't know if you want to share this, I didn't know where you were going to go with that, with a story of something that I'd forgotten. you and I met, I guess maybe it was probably around 2009, 2010. Maybe it was 2010 when you were running for Parliament, as you do. And I started this, which was called Think Act Vote. And I feel like that's how we first connected. I'd come across Climate Rush before that, and I had come to a couple of meetings and actions. And then I remember that we went on a walk on Hampstead Heath, and that was when we really chatted, which was for your campaign. I just want to share for those that don't know you and don't know your story that you have brought an amazing amount of creativity, voice, and drama to the climate movement in a way that it really needed. And it's always been such a joy to kind of witness you, and especially in those years where it was a different time. It seemed less urgent, but those of us that were paying attention knew what was possible if the world flipped at that moment. And so we were really going for it. And you were such a big part of that.
Yeah, I remember that walk really well, and you kindly giving me a t-shirt and me being so, I think it was that stage when I was just so amazed when ever there was these acts of generosity, just easy generosity towards me. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got a t-shirt. So it's so ridiculous. Anyway, yes, wasn't that a wild time? My 20s feels like, when I look back on it, I'm just God, that was so tiring. I wasn't tired at the time at all. I had this, this enormous drive, and there did seem to be a kind of momentum to a specific narrative. And I guess it was a kind of narrative of taking deeper forms of creative action to increase awareness around climate change. And, I felt so in purpose during that time. And I guess I had that, the clarity of youth in some ways. I wasn't second guessing myself. In some ways, the challenges that now I put on, a particular plan that I might want to do. I didn't have any of that. It was quite in some ways, it was a lack of sophistication, really. I wasn't being very sophisticated about my analysis of things. I was just I'm switched on and I'm running. And the thing that I was, kind of hoping to do was to bring new demographics into taking radical action on climate. When I graduated from university, I was which I guess was in 2007, something like that. I was, like you say, there was so few of us who were freaking out about climate change. And we were gathering in places like climate camps, which were camps that was kind of set up at high carbon infrastructure sites. So a power station or an airport. And I went to the one outside Heathrow Airport maybe in 2007, in the summer of 2007, after I finished university. In some ways, I think I was just following a crush that I had at university to this climate camp. I wasn't oh my God, climate change is so important, blah, blah, blah. I was oh, this person's really cute and they're really passionate about this thing called climate change. And I do know about it because I studied it in geography, and, I'll go along to this climate camp. And then I remember there was a guy called Deepak. I can't remember his surname, but he did loads of campaigning on biofuels. And I haven't really come across him since those early years of me being a climate activist. But he sat with me and he took me through the science. And it's so weird because in a way, what he was doing prefigures the Extinction Rebellion talk. The Extinction Rebellion talk is this talk that everybody who got involved in Extinction Rebellion went to. And it was the talk where somebody takes you through the climate science and explains just how devastating it is and just how far-reaching its impacts are right now and will be into the future. And for some reason, Deepak sat down with me around a campfire and just took me through the climate science in such a humble and generous way. And it just landed. Now that landing is something that is happening all the time. People are anxious. People know what's going on. People are freaking out. People are wondering what they can do. People are asking what they can do. People are doing stuff. There is activity on an unprecedented scale in terms of individuals taking action and wanting to be part of movements and things like that. But back then it was 1,000 people in a field and some other people in other fields or in other places. Yeah, that was my big moment where I really understood. And I guess people now will be quite familiar with how it feels to really understand that as a species, we are in a dark place, and there doesn't seem to be an easy route out. Like the only way is through, and we need to figure out how we're going to move through it. But back then it was quite weird for somebody to be freaking out that much about climate change, and I didn't quite understand what the barriers were to people understanding. And in some ways I still don't, even though there is a flourishing movement, it's not on the scale that it needs to be. And I still am perplexed as to why this isn't the only thing we're talking about, and that we're not all kind of transforming in light of it. But yeah, basically, long story short, I think like the next day I went with a group called Plain Stupid, and I knew about the suffragettes, and I've always been inspired by the suffragettes, and I know about direct action, and how there is, like, through history there have been these kind of vanguards of people who have pulled something into the public eye by doing dramatic things, by taking action in dramatic ways, and by provoking conversations through the risk of their action or through the courage of their action, and have courted public opinion and haven't really cared like what the public thinks about it, but have just insisted that the public thinks something about it. And so like the next day I went with Plain Stupid, and we locked the gates of a private airport shut, and I was suddenly on Newsnight. Like Newsnight had like come along and shoved this camera in my face, and Newsnight is like a big important BBC news program for folk who don't know. And suddenly I was defending this action and the model of direct action. Really from that moment on, it was like that's what I was doing. I was using nonviolent civil disobedience, I was taking action, and I was defending action and talking about climate change. And yeah, that evolved for me from Plain Stupid into Climate Rush, which was much more participatory. It was more inviting and maybe more inclusive. It was saying we need 1,000 people, and I was targeting at the time women, and encouraging women to kind of connect with their history of radical direct action and feminism and courage, and also the flair of the suffragettes, like the beautiful outfits and like the curation of their own messages through what they were wearing, and the banners that they were wearing on them, and the sashes, exactly, and all of that. So it was something different. And I think it was, like everybody was like, oh, wow, that's something different. And that's really exciting and interesting. And it was like an angle for the newspapers. Like there was suddenly this kind of new contingent on the climate activist scene, and that it was kind of fairly young, female, as with all climate action at that time, overwhelmingly white. But at that time as well, I think we were way less sophisticated in noticing that, even, let alone kind of seeing it as something to center and deliberately move away from. But yeah, it felt really exciting. It did feel really exciting, and we did so many actions. So like the first action that we did was to celebrate the Suffragette Rush, and the Suffragette Rush was when like 1,000 women rushed at Parliament on the 13th of October 1908, and when they rushed at Parliament, the police fought back, and it was kind of like a riot between the police and all of these like well-to-do women on the streets of Parliament over women's suffrage and the right to vote. And that fight, or that scuffle between the police and these women, was just front page news, and it really elevated the discussion. Like it put it on everybody's agenda. It was, what people were talking about in pubs. And so we wanted to celebrate the 100th anniversary of that suffragette rush, to kind of invite the same ferocity of spirit and the same courage, and the idea that actually we can use our bodies, we can do dramatic things, and if we do it together, then we're stronger, and we can carry each other through these moments of fear or risk. And so there were, I think about 1,000 people showed up, and they were all dressed in different versions of what the suffragettes meant to them. There was kind of like people in such meticulously fabulous outfits. It was like you've literally stepped off like an old photo from 1908, like an old suffragette, and then there were some kind of like punk suffragettes, and all of them were wearing these sashes that we'd made. We'd made about 500 sashes, and they were screen printed with these demands of no airport expansion, no third runway, no new coal, climate action now. And there was this like amazing spirit of unity. And Caroline Lucas was like one of our speakers, and she was the last speaker to go. And at the end, she was like, the time for words is over and the time for action is now. And there was like this roar, and this was all quite, in some ways, like these dramatic scenes are now kind of part of what we expect from protest culture. But if we weren't using kind of the street theatre and the creativity and the drama of that creativity, plus a little bit of, audacious, yes, we are going to push back against the police. Those things weren't so much of the kind of common language of protest as they are now. And so then we like started to move together, and we're chanting this suffragette chant of deeds, not words, pushing and pushing and pushing. And the police were just like, what has happened? There were like about 20 police. And again, like this kind of policing wouldn't happen now. Like it would be so heavily policed. But there were about 20 police, and they were not expecting this like bunch of dressed up, costumed, nice girls. Exactly.
The good girls are coming.
Yeah. Led by like, I think Caroline Lucas at that point was a member of a European Parliament. They were like, what is going on? And they just got pushed back right to the door of Parliament. They had to slam the door of Parliament shut because we were really like coming for it. It was like, oh my God, we're actually going to do this. Yeah, that was kind of the launch of Climate Rush. And we thought it would just be a one-off event. And then there was such a like enjoyment of that event and a desire for more things like it that we kind of kept on showing up and doing more. And I think at that point, yeah, I guess like everyone was like, oh, Tamsin who had been doing stuff with Plain Stupid, and yeah, I'd been doing that stuff, and then suddenly I was doing this stuff. And I think maybe the press and people like that started thinking of me as a kind of movement organizer. They were like, oh, okay, Tamsin is often at these things, doing these sorts of things. And I guess in a way that I look back on it now, and, I was in my 20s, I was like in my early 20s, I was just a kid in some ways. I didn't really understand, and I still don't really understand media narratives and like how much they celebrate the status quo and enforce the status quo. And, the stories that they're telling are the stories that benefit them and their shareholders or whatever it is. So, they like immediately latched onto me as a kind of spokesperson for the environmental movement. And at the time I was like, great, I'm different. I'm young, I'm queer, I'm identified as a woman back then. I'm a woman. This is great. I should be the voice of the environmental movement. And like now I'm like, oh, actually, and also I'm posh. I'm like educated in the same kind of places that like power has accumulated. And actually I fit in really well with a certain narrative about activists, which is like, it's something for a particular class of people. It's something for people who don't have anything else to worry about. It's something for those people to worry about. And those people are telling you what to do, like all elites do. And it was also damaging. It was both damaging and not damaging that I became this kind of media figure at that time. I didn't have the sophistication, or like, I guess, you get a bit older and you're like, I feel like these days I listen to people more than I used to back then. People told me like, don't mess with the media. And I was like, you don't understand because you're not the voice of the movement.
Well, I would say like knowing you at that time, you weren't that much of a brat as you making it out now that you are, that you were. I mean, of course, I can feel the maturity that's come with age, and also just with the way in which more complexity and also just a deeper perspective on privilege has come into the way in which we understand our lives. And I don't feel like that has to take away from what was courageous and that did capture attention. I mean, you did scale Parliament. That was going to get you in the papers. and no one else was doing that. No other young women doing that at the time. Yeah. So posh or not, you made a really important offering to this movement. And you did get a lot of women involved that didn't know how to get involved, because at the time, a lot of protests could be very violent at that time. I had been to various protests, and I just, found them just very, very intense. And I didn't really feel like that was a place for me. But going to these actions that now, through Extinction Rebellion, they've become more familiar in this movement of that creativity and that theatre comes into play. At that time, that was new. And so I feel like at that time, women were also a much more marginalized group in this space as well. And so it was important. And I guess we're always expanding, but there's something, I don't know if you feel this, because I also feel myself to be more in that space of listening and so aware of all the complexity that it can make it hard to take action. I wonder if that also gets in the way of actions happening that would still be useful. I wonder if anything can happen that isn't harmful in some way anyway. And so there's something to be said for taking action over kind of just standing on the sidelines trying to work out all the complexity and not knowing what to do.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And I wonder whether it's like a generational thing as well, a little bit. You know, it's like there will be a whole raft of new activists coming up, like youth activists, and it has already happened in some ways with like the youth movements and the school strikes, etc. And like all of those kids are now turning into adults, you know, like now they're in their early 20s and they're figuring out like what they want to do and how they want to contribute to the movement. And yes, like there does, I guess it's that thing between like reflection and action. And, you know, I guess on the, you know, the good guys, like we do agonize, don't we? Or we can agonize. And I think like I definitely didn't agonize very much in my 20s. I kind of shut down those voices of self-doubt. I didn't really realize that I was shutting them down. Like I was really jamming them to the base of my stomach. And actually over even recognizing that they were there has been a useful thing, because, you know, I don't want to just ignore them. I want to integrate them somehow and allow myself kind of heal from whatever it is that has been causing such an overwhelming self-doubt. But yeah, at the time I was like, I don't doubt myself. This is the most important thing in the world. Everybody should be doing this all of the time. And I wonder if like maybe it can be that like generationally, it's just something like the young people will always just be a bit fiercer. Like they'll be like, okay, actually, I'm gonna, you know, I can learn from my elders. I can see what's happened, what they've been doing. I remember like looking at the kind of environmental movement back then. It was so male, like you say, like it was really, you know, the kind of earth first kind of vibes, which was like almost the only kind of activisty space. It was about like destroying property, and that felt scary and illegal, and there kind of weren't so many gray areas. And I think, you know, what you're saying about all of these gray areas that have opened up through performance theatre and are now exploited beautifully by like the likes of Extinction Rebellion. It's really interesting to see how the gray areas are actually quite helpful in kind of stepping boldly into those gray areas and teasing them out a little bit. But yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I like I can't believe it, Amisha, but I do feel like we're not the kids anymore. You know, it's like, I mean, we definitely don't have it sussed. No. But I think, you know, like it's that thing where like I can't not be reflective about these things now, and the way that I played it and it played me, this kind of big media circus that I was standing in. You know, it was like I was very deliberately courting media attention. I thought it would be useful, and it, as you say, it was useful, like in its limited way, it was useful. But yeah, it definitely also played me. Yeah, there are some things that I'm just so happy people may never find because they're lost in like the ethers of the internet. But, you know, like, these awful like pieces that I would write because like somebody would tell me it was a good idea and someone else would pay me to do it. And it's just like, oh, Tamsin, like, what were you doing? It's like, I just thought I knew everything. And like my silencing of my self-doubt meant that it was like necessary for me to believe that I was just right. I'm so glad that I don't have to be right all the time anymore. Yeah, that feels like freedom.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm also wondering around comfort and passion. Both of us went to Singing with the Nightingales, and Tiff, who was supporting Sam Lee when I was putting my tent up, said something about how comfort was the great like destroyer or great enemy of passion. I've been wondering with climate and where we are, because we are comfortable within it in varying degrees, depending on where we're sat. But many of us that are listening to a podcast are comfortable enough to be listening to a podcast. And direct action is really coming out of that space of comfort. And yet as you said, like a lot of people maybe within the movement are a bit posh. And so there is a level of comfort which gives space in order to be able to spend more time getting worked up about these issues rather than, just having to kind of keep one's head down and kind of survive the system. Yeah, I'm curious where you're at with that now. Obviously, with Extinction Rebellion, a lot of young people did like put themselves on the line, and there's been a lot of arrests. And then we're now in a space where the laws are closing in around protesting and making a stand for something in this country. And so I just wonder what's alive for you within all of that. Because, women didn't get the vote until people literally died. And so how do we find our way in this kind of space of comfort, passion, really intense laws and policing, and all of this complexity around not wanting to do the wrong thing?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good question, Amisha. It's really, when I was doing that overwhelming amount of activism through my 20s, I was like really throwing myself at, in some ways, like a wall of public disinterest. And, these things have changed with kind of 2019. I think all of this sort of changed with XR and Greta Thunberg and, the IPCC saying that we've got 12 years left, or 12 years to turn the ship around. I think there was like an enormous raising of consciousness that those three things all together at the same time provoked. But like before that, it was, as you said, like it was a much smaller movement, and it was really hard to kind of get people to listen and get people to care. And now it feels like it's a really different world. It's like a world where we are in crisis, albeit comfortably so. And like the fact of climate change is accepted. Also, like more terrifyingly, its impacts, which I kind of thought would be unacceptable to kind of our moral consciousness. It turns out that we are also accepting those, because I guess to not accept it would disrupt our own comfort so drastically that it's kind of easier to just be like, okay, well, climate change is happening and it's going to create all of this loss. And some of that loss, we, the most powerful people in the kind of whatever, like global north, or like white Western world, or like however you want to call like whatever this configuration is of like sitting here in England in 2022, it feels like we're not having a conversation anymore about how do you stop climate change, and instead we're having a conversation which is like, how do you live in a world that doesn't just have climate change but also has war, which used to be something that only happened to people over there, and now it turns out it also happens to people in like Western Europe, let's say, if like these words are useful. It doesn't just have war and climate change in it. It has pandemics. It also doesn't just have pandemics. So this kind of like
it's a refugee crisis.
It also has a refugee crisis,
and it has Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. And then it has like, oh wait, we're also overwhelmed, and maybe we should just be caring for ourselves. And like, it's so complex. And I think that's it, is like, in some ways, like our more complicated or sophisticated way of like looking at these things and trying to hold all of these unique realities in our like very inadequate like understanding. It's just not under the surface anymore. All of these kind of multiple oppressions and the ways that our actions are harming and that we're feeding that harm, like it's just everywhere. Like it's kind of impossible to avoid. What we're choosing to do as a society is ignore it more, like really dig our heads as deeply as possible into the sand. And then there are people like you and I who have been working on this stuff forever, or like what feels like forever for my adult life. And it's like, what do we do in this context? And I'm asking this for myself. Like, it used to be so clear to me. It was like, get people to know it's happening, and then we'll figure out with like that new awakened demographic what to do. But now it's like, okay, well, people do know it's happening, And also they know that there's vast injustices, all of which require organising, community building, transforming ourselves and the assumptions inside of us, as well as transforming other people's opinions about these things. Like, it's really difficult to know what one person can do in this. And also we've all been trained to be such individuals and to live these individual lives and to see like to need to succeed on our own and to need to like have our output in the world externally validated across all social media channels all of the time. You know, we've become hooked to these like dopamine hits that likes are giving us. So it's just like, it feels like a very complex world. And in some ways for me, like, how am I navigating this like passion, which I do have for people and for trying to make things better and for trying also to tread as softly as possible on this planet and to try to connect with people and create some good resilience in some places. Like that, those are the things that feel important to me or that I feel passionate about. And then there's also this thing of like, I do need comfort. And I guess the comfort that I need is maybe different from like mainstream comfort. It hurts living in a world where there is so much crisis and so few, it seems to me, like mass participation solutions. You know, I think I really wanted this moment to be different. I wanted there to be something that I could be like, I belong to and therefore I know my place in this. Like, I know what I'm doing. I know that it feels good. I know that it's useful. And actually, like, it's kind of devastating, but it's like, I don't really believe that there is a mass participation movement that I particularly want to belong to, or that I think would really like welcome me to it. That, you know, I have tried. Like, I look at the political parties, I look at like the bigger movements that exist. And actually, I think maybe this is kind of where I'm at the moment a little bit, which is like, I'm just not sure that like the scale that we've been told is a very useful scale of like, here is the thing that currently exists. It's called capitalism. It is consuming everything and churning out a particular sort of comfort for a particular demographic who have enjoyed like historic privilege forever or like seemingly forever. And then like against that, we need to develop something else that can beat capitalism, and then capitalism will like go away and we can all join this other thing that will emerge. And like, I don't know that I believe that in that scale anymore. Like, what I kind of believe in is that capitalism has created crisis. Capitalism will not be able to continue in its current form through these crises. The disintegration of capitalism will create enormous levels of injustice and oppression, and some people who profit enormously from capitalism will keep their existences safe through investing in tools of oppression and separation. And in the cracks of all of that, a million different stories will emerge of people who don't want to be part of that and who want to do something different. And those stories will be incredibly small scale and they will all be very different. And some of them will work beautifully and be the perfect thing. And some of them will be like not very good and not something that I'd want to sit in, but like at least they're not the other thing, which is the kind of, 1% building the walls and drawing up the drawbridge. So I think I'm kind of a bit more like that now. I'm like, there's no grand narrative, like there's no counterattack, there's no rebel fleet that I get to be a part of. Like, there's me deciding where I want to try to build that small scale resilient community and going and finding people that would want to do it alongside. And maybe that's like 50 people maximum who I can actually believe that I could grow old with. And maybe the thing that we're doing isn't going to be on Instagram.
I think we all want to get off Instagram at this point.
Get off Instagram. Heal your soul.
I saw something, just a meme today that made me laugh, which was like being an artist in 1985. And it was like 25% like creating a work, and 75% sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then it was like being an artist in 2022, 25% creating your work, 75% social media.
Awful. Oh.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Tamsin. I'm feeling a lot of grief right now, especially because we just went back in time to when it didn't feel like that. As we were talking about those moments of our 20s, I was just remembering that it didn't feel like that. It felt like everything was still, like the world was going to be the same, but we were just going to make it a bit better. And we could make it a bit better. And eventually people were going to listen to us. And all of these systems that were a bit corrupted, you know, like I was doing all that work in sustainable fashion. It's like, well, as soon as they realize that this has got corrupted, of course, like it's going to change. And being here with you in this moment, having heard the way that you just expressed, and kind of remembering, you know, all of these moments that have happened along the way. Oh, it's just a lot, isn't it? It's just
really
so, it's really, there's so much grief present. Yeah. And it's kind of like, I mean, I'm going to start finding out what it means to be young today and talk to more younger people about how they're navigating this, because they didn't have that really hopeful time that we had.
Didn't. Yeah.
I'm curious how that feels different.
Yeah, I'm sure it feels really different. I think about young people and the world, the kind of crisis-laden world that they've grown up with, and the levels of anxiety and mental health epidemic and all of this, and just like the basic assumptions, I guess, like in some ways I'm a child of like, I don't know what, like, but like in an era,
credit cards,
yeah, like that believed everything was going to get better, like,
yeah.
And in some ways, like that fundamental assumption is still baked into me at like, you know, a submolecular level. I just have like a basic optimism where I'm like, oh yeah, but things are going to get better. But they're not. You know, like the actual reality is they're not going to get better in like a huge grand narrative way, like that grand narrative, which is like the basis of our current society, you know, the kind of like American dream narrative.
Our green dream.
Our green dream narrative. It turns out that was just supporting a really destructive economic model. It was all just made up so that a few people could have their dream, if indeed it is a dream to have those lives that those people have. It's not a dream that I dream of.
I guess what we're also saying is like, so there's the American dream, but then there's also this other kind of green dream that we all had, that somehow there was going to be something else that was going to be sort of quite magical, realizing that the depths of suffering that is already happening, the number of climate refugees that we have, for example, and how much that's going to intensify. And yet the archetype of the activist is that we always believe in the possible and that there is, that somehow, no matter how tired, disillusioned, hungry we are, that something happens and another bit of inspiration, another bit of energy comes, and that will keep happening for both of us and for all activists. And I feel that the power of vision is an important part of that. And so I'm going to ask you the question that I ask normally earlier on in this conversation, which has evolved from the question that I asked you actually probably when we first met, because this whole thing started with the question, what is the future you choose? When this started as Think Act Vote. And I realized the other day that it's now 10 years since we published the book of The Future We Choose, which had all of those visions and all of those actions and all of those ideas that you contributed to. We've evolved the question slightly to, what are the futures of your wildest dreams? I would love to hear what is alive there in that vision.
Yay. This is the most beautiful question, isn't it? Let us sit and imagine the future of our wildest dreams, or the futures of our wildest dreams. So thank you, Amisha. I'm very pleased with this evolution of your foundational question. And I think it's not separate at all from like this idea, you know, that we've just talking about around like the green dream, and like the way that actually that we've seen this system needs more than just a green retrofit. And maybe what we were hoping for back in our 20s of like, can this system evolve to be a less crap version of this system, was like a little bit of blindness from me, at least, in terms of like how rotten the roots of this system are and how far back they reach and how they're steeped in the labor of slaves and the labor of, you know, the kind of product of the earth being exploited and people being exploited. And, you know, exploitation is like, it's the roots of the system that we've got right now, and it's exploitation from a few, like a very small selection of the planet to like the vast majority. And the evolution, the green dream that we're imagining, like maybe that would have been built on the same roots and it would have been a different version of it, and it may have been a slightly kinder version or like a more just version. It might have redistributed the enormous wealth that's been taken by the white Western world. It might have redistributed it slightly further, but essentially like it probably would have been, you know, growing from the same branch or whatever. My wildest dreams involve an uprooting of those exploitative and extractive roots and a kind of gardening of like, you know, a sowing the seeds of some different assumptions. I guess like liberation is a word I don't understand, but I feel so drawn to it. You know, when I hear someone like Black feminists, especially when I hear them speak about liberation, I'm just like, I want that. I don't quite know what it means, but I want it. Like, I want to feel free. I want to like see you and for you to be free and for you to feel free and for us to like be free together in a world that like is not oppressing us and is not requiring us to be anything other than exactly what we were born to be and to become. And so I guess like in some ways, yeah, the futures of my wildest dreams involves like uprooting those systems that tell me or allow me to, or encourage me to tell myself that I'm not good enough, that there's something wrong with me, that I'll never belong anywhere, that to belong, I need to accumulate like wealth, I need to accumulate like the perfect 2 point whatever, however many children, and the perfect partner, and the perfect this and the perfect that, and all of these things need to look really good and shiny, and everybody needs to see how well I'm succeeding at life. Like I want to like batter that dream, which feels like a really white supremacist dream or a white supremacist version of like what success is. Like success is being better than other people. Like I want liberation from that model. So yeah, the future of my wildest dreams, I guess the future that I'm currently working towards, which is a future beyond my wildest dreams, is one where I live in nature. At the moment, I live in London, so it feels quite far away from like the future of my wildest dreams, but I'm definitely working towards one where I live in nature, I have enough, and that feels quite precarious. The idea that any of us in the future that we're going towards, which is one of catastrophic climate change, will be a future that includes having enough food, etc. But I would like, the future of my wildest dreams does include having enough, participating in like the system, you know, in the means of producing that enough, whatever that looks like. So however my participation might be, like that being something where I'm bringing the best of myself, like where I'm not just being part of a community where it's like we're all able to bring the best of ourselves, and also to recognize that for the community to flourish, we need to just be prepared to do the hard work as well. And kind of negotiating those things as a community, being surrounded by people that I love and learning to love people even more deeply than I can imagine right now, like platonic love. I want to like have beautiful platonic friendships, and I want to be able to love people even if they're really like annoying, certain situations, but to recognize that like that's just a bit of them, and actually in this other situation they're amazingly enlightened. I often think that around like people that are like, I'm so speedy in some ways. I'm like, come on, let's move, let's go. And I can be really impatient. And actually, like, one of my best mates is somebody who just forces me to walk really slow out in nature. We always meet up on Hampstead Heath and go for these like achingly slow walks. And I'm like, what's the point if I'm not doing 10,000 steps and blah, blah, blah. And they're just like, Tamsin, just slow the fuck down. I'm like, so I guess the future beyond my wildest dreams, I'm in nature, I am me, and I'm not apologizing to anyone, but also I'm not apologizing to myself. I'm not ashamed of myself. I'm just really proud to be me in a kind of liberated way. I'm surrounded by people that I love. We have a community. We can sustain ourselves. And we're not hiding from the reality of what's beyond our community's walls. And also we have a really great inclusive system of ensuring that our walls are permeable. I guess something that I've always been scared of is the idea that this little island can pull up the drawbridge. And in fact, as we're seeing, that is how it's turning out. But if I'm going to be on this little island, then I'd like for my community to not echo that practice. Yeah, I guess in some ways I've been theorizing for so long about like, we're all going to live in communities and they're all going to be self-sufficient. And, like, what's this reality going to look like? And we're going to live by anarchistic principles and blah, blah, blah. And like, I guess my wildest dreams is that I'm actually doing that. Like I'm moving from a kind of theory about how we build resilient communities, which I bang on it about in my book so much, stealing from the wisdom of like Black feminists like Adrienne Marie Brown. I'm like, I just write that, what she said. But I want that practice now. I want to find out if it's possible to do this on a small scale, to prepare for the future and to live in the future on a scale that is achievable.
We are taking just a short pause here. If you are enjoying this episode, please consider joining our community. For a small contribution, you can be part of our beautiful online world, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and practice. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, and you receive a number of benefits, such as special member-only events and discounts on all our courses, retreats, and in-person experiences. You will have membership to our app and connect with inspiring humans around the world through a social network to discuss the themes of the show away from the eyes of advertisers and the manipulation of big tech. Our membership is what makes us able to stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And it is the very heart of all that we are. Head to www.allthatweare.org/support to find out more. How do you imagine the participating in the bigger picture happens in those spaces? I've just now moved into a community house, and I watched two of my new house community women plant our first bits of food. I say watched because, I didn't help. I was having a day where I was recording loads of things on Zoom. So here we are, balancing. You grow the food, I'm on Zoom. And so, I just wonder how it really works if we all go into these self-sufficient communities. And also, I think we also have to acknowledge that not everyone's going to go, and what's going to happen to the people that are not able to do that. And how do we do that and still have energy and time and awareness for things outside of our immediacy, which living in cities is really good for, because we brush up against so many different stories and edges and issues all the time. And you don't have to have the answer to that. This podcast is basically one where nobody can ever really answer the questions. I just like to ask them anyway.
You're like, tell me about your wildest dream. And now, how are we going to get here? And also, let me just problematize it by saying that it can come true. But
I'm
what
so
about
sorry, Tamsin.
these?
I didn't mean to piss on your tree.
What about these external impacts that you haven't thought about? No, honestly, like I don't have good answers for this at all. What I say is that I used to sneer at projects that involved leaving London and leaving the centres of decision making and also the spaces where marginalised people live and the people who don't have an option to leave London live or leave the big kind of commercial capitals live because of economic injustice and the inevitability of that, or, you know, whatever the reasons are that many people live here. I'll give you an example. There was something called the Dark Mountain Project, and it was like created by some white dudes. I think like so much of this is peppered by my own like sneering the way that I felt about it at the time, and this was about 10 years ago when I was in them.
Dougal Hine was one of the main people but isn't involved in it anymore.
Okay. At the time I was like, you can't create a plan B because we need to all work on plan A, and plan A is that we all get through this and that we don't leave people behind. I still believe that. Like, I still very deeply believe that we shouldn't be leaving people behind. How do I square this with wanting to leave London? I guess like in very practical terms, the way that I square it is like the community that I am envisaging isn't one that exists in a kind of vacuum, that it emerges from deep ties to marginalized communities in, I guess for us it'll be in Glasgow, but like we've got a whole, we've got like a 10-year plan, and the immediate step is to go to Glasgow, to like deeply root into Glasgow, find out what's going on, who's there, who's doing good work, who's doing the kind of like work that we would want to be part of. And then from there, start exploring out into Scotland and into, nature, basically, like looking for a good site for a community, and then, or whether something that like already exists that we could just go and join, or go and, start something, and then like very immediately have it as a space where, a little bit like Zoe's work, actually. Yeah, Zoe Palmer, who I think like brings people of colour out into nature and kind of challenges this myth, which is such a British myth, that nature is for white people and not really just white people, actually white privileged people. Like, we own it, it's ours, and nobody should trespass on it.
To be fair, it is mostly owned by white privileged people in this country.
Yeah, totally. And like the unraveling of that myth, we've got to start challenging that and creating narratives that disrupt that narrative. And so like the idea is that very immediately this becomes, whilst we're not in immediate urgent crisis here, or like not total crisis here, like society isn't totally breaking down here, people from various backgrounds, but especially kind of marginalized backgrounds, are able to come and access this land and take part on courses and et cetera, and create a connection with this land, so that when shit hits the fan, it's like a memory of, oh, wait a second, 10 years ago, I went on this course at this place. Maybe I would be welcome there. Maybe I could go there. But I guess it's like that. It's so much more now, I think, in my understanding of how I can usefully do things. Like, it's down to small connections. It's down to like figuring out how to be a place of sanctuary for 100 people, not just white privileged people, rather than how to transform the whole thing, because I don't think the whole thing wants to be transformed, sadly. And that kind of speaks to what you were saying around comfort.
There's a relationship that I've not always tended to very well, because I've always been thinking so big and this kind of everybody kind of thing. I've not always tended very well to my own life. And I feel like the cracks of that are showing much more strongly now, because I can't push myself in the same way. I have more responsibilities. It's harder to do certain things with less money than it is when you're in your 20s. There's also kind of an interesting kind of aspect of all of it, which is that, it's all so complicated, isn't it, Tamsin? But where is the line of your own like level of needs being met that is comfortable enough, but not too comfortable so that you don't take action, but is comfortable enough so that you're resourced and you do less harm in your action to yourself and to others. I don't know. I haven't figured this one out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really strongly agree with this. And I think there is so much kind of trauma in movement spaces because people have exhausted themselves and have given and given and given and not nourished themselves. And then there is like an enormous amount of resentment because they gave and gave and gave. And what did they get back? You know, it kind of turns into this like feeling of not being seen, not being appreciated, a feeling of hurt. And like I felt all of those things myself, you know, like I like you, like had this big picture, big vision, big grand narrative around, you know, I needed to just do it. And I didn't realize that I really thought like, you know, like the world needs me doing this stuff. And actually like I needed to be doing that stuff because I needed to feel useful because like of that kind of gnawing self-doubt at the base of me. And so I guess, you know, like all of this is just to say we need to be sustainable. You know, it's like that thing where we talk about sustainability, we advocate for sustainability, we like fight for it. And then it's like our own lives are a total mess. and we haven't, you know, we haven't looked after ourselves and we're tired and depleted. And I think we're much more likely to swerve in that direction. And for us, it's a matter of like figuring out what our boundaries are, like what amount of work we can do usefully, how much we can do that if we're not also like filling the cup up. But I guess there are other people who like fill the cup up too much and don't necessarily like pour it back out. And with that, I just think it's all about example, you know, like in some ways, I think like it's such a funny old time because there are just so many opinions everywhere all of the time. Everyone's got an opinion on everything. And I just don't feel like any of us are being particularly influenced by like other people's opinions. And actually what really influences me is like seeing someone make different decisions and then put those decisions into practice. The best thing that you and me, Amisha, can do is live balanced lives and like say no to things from time to time, or like often, you know, like take a whole 3 months of just saying no to things because actually we need to, you know, go and lie in the sunshine or like read a book or like fill up our ideas again. For me, at the end of my 20s, I kind of burnt out. And a lot of it was I had to stop being curious about ideas. I'd just been working so hard towards like my particular vision of how things should be that I'd stopped having a curiosity about other ways and other people and other experiences. And, you know, we need to fill ourselves up because otherwise we're just like churning out something that we might have thought like 3 years ago. And actually like loads of other people are doing loads of interesting thinking and practicing. And we have like, of course, there is a lot of grief present because the old way is at an end and there will be immense amounts of loss associated with that ending. And there already is immense amounts of loss, but also like, I don't feel gloomy. You know, I think like more and more people are going to be making really interesting choices in the coming years. And like, we're not going to be alone up here figuring this out by ourselves. Like more and more people are going to start and already are making big decisions about how they can live differently because they're not okay with what their current lives are contributing towards. And that feels really fertile, you know. In some ways, it's like what happened before was like really trying to make a dead system be alive. And now it feels like, okay, we'll just step away from that, walk away from it, and instead like go to where there is like a lot of fertility and a lot of excitement, a lot of, you know, people doing things differently and trying to help.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you share around like the importance of sort of staying curious and open to ideas, and in that generative space where you're receiving creative inspiration, where you're seeing things differently, you know, where you're connected into a consciousness that allows a lot of things to move through you that are of this moment. And, you know, capitalism does that thing. You write a book and you talk about it for 3 years, But like when we're really like alive and awake, there's the next thing comes. And the activist narrative, that I've experienced this narrative, but I kind of want to add like a little nuance to it of like, you know, you're working from self-doubt and needing to be useful and belong, and it's all bad that's motivating you to do something that's good. And then like you see the light and you like have to, you know, you go on this deep path and it comes from this deeper place. But I also feel that what's present the whole time through that, just like a very simple love of life and love of nature and love of preserving what is beautiful in this world and making possible what is possible in this world. And that like not everyone is always acting out of their like negative, like dark shadows, like that we also operate a lot from our inspiration and natural desire as human beings to live in a more loving, connected, beautiful way where it is more equal and it is easier in that we are able to just be human more, and we are less kind of sucked into these kind of versions of ourselves where we're not kind of able to connect to our soul and connect to our creativity. And I just want to say that because I feel like sometimes, you know, the narrative can be just really hard on us. That was always present. Like that's always been present to me in your work and in any activist work. And yes, at times resentment, and yes, at times tiredness, and yeah, at times the needing to be seen, and all of these things. But it's never that simple that we always still have that, because at its core, like what human being doesn't want to be safe and able to access food and water and able to dance and sing with their fellow humans? Like that is our natural state as human beings. And when we step out of ourselves as capitalist beings, we do understand that part of what's also always present for activists is just like, well, this doesn't make sense. Like
yes. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I was speaking to somebody about how they feel about their purpose in life or something. And they were just like, I just feel so confused about the state of the world. I just want to do something to make it better. And it's like that. It's, yeah, I like, thank you, Amisha. Like, honestly, I think it's great that my understanding has become more sophisticated, and I've done some deep thinking and some reading and reflecting and all of these important things. And now I'm like a little bit more self-aware.
And quite hard on yourself.
Exactly. It's like I really don't want it to go there, because actually like I live in such a place of like joy right now. Like I'm so proud of myself. I think I'm doing great work. I think I've done great work. Yeah, for all of it. It's like this little journey of my life on this planet is one that I love, and it's happening during a time when our species is like in such crisis. And yet I managed to pick a way through it, which has felt good. Like I feel good about it. You know, I think that is quite extraordinary, actually. And so, yay, well done me. So yes, I don't want to just go into like, but I was so blind back when I was, you know, a little, you know, privileged, whatever, white girl coming out of university. Like it's not true. Like there are so many things that are the same about who I was back then and who I am now. And that desire to respond to my confusion about injustice through taking action and through like reaching out to people and collaborating and being creative about it and having fun and all of that. Like that's my character. And I love that. I love my true Tamsin character. I'm like, yay, it's sweet. And I'm like, yeah, well done, Tamsin. So yeah, it's like, I think it is really important to like not like retrofit a doomy narrative on our paths. Like the amazing thing about hanging out with activists and hanging out with people is like humans are amazing. You know, it's like our systems are terrible, but actually like humans are just like such sweet and charming folk. And when I can't connect with someone, it's mostly because like I'm scared that they don't want to connect with me, or they're scared that I don't want to connect with them. And like that fear, and that might be because like we're like different classes, like we've got different opportunities, we've had different experience, we're from different like races, like whatever it is, like that kind of like, oh no, this isn't going to work, is usually like when I can't connect with someone. And actually when I kind of take all of that away, it's like, it's so easy. Like it's kind of effortless. And like you said, it's, you know, yeah, like a wonderful night out in nature, or like a wonderful like way of moving with somebody and dancing and like singing and whatever it is. Like there's a real ease. Yeah, I don't know. Like I really don't think it is all gloom. I think like the human spirit is phenomenal. And I guess like I'm kind of curious about those moments over the coming years of like when we're going to like find joy amongst it all, like when our human spirits are just going to go like, hey, look what we can create over here, and like, yeah, we're going to make it inclusive, and yeah, it's going to be really fun, and yeah, you know, it's like, because that is inevitably going to happen.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that you've done in your kind of activist career, I would say that you've fought some losing battles, like that were kind of obvious that you were never going to be able to do that. Like when you stood for Parliament as an independent, impossible task. And then you stood for Parliament again for the Greens.
Yeah.
There's only, you know, again, a impossible task. And then when you stood more recently to be joint leader of the Green Party, that wasn't an impossible task. But you centred that you were trans as part of that campaign. And I would love for you to share what this whole exploration with gender and sexuality means to you, and why it's really important to also centre that within politics.
Yeah. Oh my God, what a question that I'm not prepared for. Let's see if I can answer it in a coherent way. Yeah.
Whilst you're thinking, I'm just realising that when this conversation is available to be listened to, it's already going to be the 2nd of June. So I would like to ask for an extension for the horse ride until the end of June, if anyone listening can help us find a horse.
Amazing. Okay, like, will you just come with me? You don't have to be... Okay, brilliant. Yeah, we need 2 horses. I won't force you to be topless, but you have to come with.
Okay.
2 horses, and we've got until the end of June. And like this person, magical person listening, you have to bring the horses into London, and then you have to take the horses out, and you have to look after them very carefully, which I'm sure you do anyway.
You might have to stay with us as well, because
we don't know how to ride. We've got no idea what we're doing.
Well, you are becoming an icon of the trans movement. When you find us horses, everyone listening, you can decide what I'm going to dress as.
You can be Lady Godiva. Let's like queer and like decolonize our British history. You can be Lady Godiva, and I will be your like, what's the guy, the name of like your steward or your vassal, or your like, I can be like your like little cute like servant, topless servant that you just like to have with you because you're Lady Godiva, and that's like what you're allowed to do.
Okay, well, I've only ridden a horse 3 times before. Just saying.
That's totally fine. I've ridden a horse about 3 times as well. But this person is going to really help us. This magical person listening is going to walk ahead of us.
Unless we do horse whispering, it's far less dramatic, but it's much more with the times. We walk along with the horses, translating what the horse wants to share with London.
That would be beautiful. I mean, I think that's more iconic right now than the other way of humans using horses. Let us, yes, translate for our other species rather than ride them.
Well, let's probably project out what we want to say in the voice of the horse. Yeah, horse whispering through London.
We're here for it.
We're here for it.
Okay, so yeah, transness and this whole journey, which I'm so glad you bring into this, because I'm so timid in some ways about bringing it in myself. And part of that is like my internalized transphobia, which is like, don't talk about it. If you talk about it, people will judge you and they'll say you're taking up space and they'll think less of you and all of that like annoying stuff in my head that's been in my head forever. And I wish I could be free of.
Well, I know we have a lot of beautiful trans people listening, some of whom have written to me and said that we don't talk about this enough. And so
Yay.
I know how important it is to be having this conversation.
Amazing.
And, you know, as somebody that, because I'm often like the brown person in the room of white people, I'm kind of normally in that place of minority. In this case, I am like very cisgendered and straight. And so this is like a whole world that I don't understand in my own body. And so really, really open to learn.
Yeah, it's so mad, isn't it? And I guess like you have this experience so nailed of like how when you're that person in the room, you're like, okay, well, look, we've got one brown person or like one trans person. So now you represent the like population of all of these people that, of course, we can't represent and whose experiences we do not hold just because we share, like for me, a trans identity or a queer experience. And so, yeah, it's always a bit like that. Like I think my timidity is like, I'm an expert at talking about the environment. I'm not an expert at talking about this stuff. And like, weirdly now, because of the current state of play in our transphobic country, where like transphobia is institutionalized and is reflected in like the policy making of our parliamentarians and in the media, you know, all of the stories that are kind of promoting a narrative of like fear. Be scared of trans people. They're coming for your changing rooms. They're coming for your children. They're gonna, you know,
what are you going to do to my children?
We're going to make your children be trans. Apparently, because there's no such thing as a trans child. There's only children who have been infected by a trans contagion and need to be, you know, kept safe from the idea that they could be trans. So like all of that sort of stuff is like, it's just ever present for the trans community. As with all marginalized communities, like we feel it and we see it everywhere, and cis people don't feel it or see it everywhere because like it doesn't really affect you, so you're not tuning into it so much. So, you know, if there's like a story a day in every major newspaper that is in some way like anti-trans or putting a narrative that is transphobic out there, like we notice it because we're on Twitter sharing it and getting upset about it or talking about it or messaging each other about it. But of course, like cis folk just don't have that experience because you don't kind of need to be sensitive to these things because you don't need to be scared because they're not coming for you. So I think it's really complex. And so what that means in this current context of like the UK right now, we're at the bottom of many a scale on LGBTQ plus rights in Europe. It's like Hungary, Turkey and England are kind of at the same level on LGBTQ plus rights because especially of the kind of toxic way that trans rights are being weaponized as something that is like part of the culture wars or whatever, which is, you know, a really political like decision to weaponize this and to create a huge, distracting and very emotional debate about something that actually isn't really a debate. Like trans people exist and need to have rights. Like, that's it. Anyway, because of this context, it means that people who are trans inevitably kind of need to be not just trans, but also need to be activists, which just feels really unfair because it's hard enough kind of within a transphobic culture, like recognizing your trans identity, coming out as trans, like all of those feel like such immensely large and difficult, thorny, you know, paths to take. And yet very necessary, I found, for me to take that path. Like I can't ignore it. It ruins my mental health to ignore it or to pretend that, you know, I can just get by like living as the gender that I was assigned at birth, which is woman. So like, I can't ignore it or avoid it. So I have to come out. And then once I've come out, I kind of, I have to live out. I have to be a trans non-binary person. And then I also need to like advocate for trans rights, because trans rights are being eroded. And, the small promises that were made 10 years ago about gender recognition and banning conversion therapy, like those have been backtracked on. And it feels like, yeah, we're at a moment where, because of this kind of weaponization of trans people and because of this creation of this culture war, which like I've got a friend who works in Downing Street, and she was like, she's like, the culture wars is like Boris Johnson's most cynical weapon to win an election. Like he is going to bang on about culture wars, because if we're all talking about whether or not trans women should be allowed to use women's bathrooms, we're not talking about parties at Downing Street. We're not talking about how he responded to the COVID pandemic. We're not talking about the cost of living crisis. We're not talking about energy bills. We're not talking about food prices. And it's like, that's the reason why he's throwing these incredibly emotional subjects out there and throwing like a very marginalized community under the bus, is because he wants to have a massive public conversation about something that like isn't real. It's not a real, like it's such a straw man. So yeah, it felt really important. I was like, it's still so fresh to me. Like I came out about 5 years ago, but like, as a trans person, especially, I kind of present, I guess if someone saw me on the street, what they're going to think is, oh, look, there's a queer woman. Like it kind of kills me to say it, because I would love people to just be like, oh, look, there's a person wearing a t-shirt, or, whatever, rather than to be like.
That's why when the horse goes down the streets of London,
I'm going to be like, look. But it's like, that's just like, we live in such a gendered world. People see gender before they see anything else. If you say you met up with someone, you're immediately gendering that person, because you're going to say, I met up with, I don't know, it's like, that's one of our first primary ways of understanding and categorizing the world is female, male. And, people don't see trans, non-binary particularly. It's a very invisible identity. And even just it claiming a tiny bit of space has created such a media backlash and public outroar. Like 12 girls at my daughter's school now say they're non-binary. It's awful. You're like, why do we care? Like, it's such a weird thing to have in it for, that was like Piers Morgan. I'm praising Piers Morgan there. It's like, why does he care? Like, what does this very privileged white dude, like, why is he interested in how a group of kids at his daughter's school feel about their gender? It's so weird.
Same reason why he hates Meghan so much.
Yes, exactly. It's so clear when you're marginalized what the root of his hatred is, which is, a fear that the privilege that he sits on might be toppled. He's a white man. Don't deconstruct gender. Don't allow any racial like presence in the royal family that isn't white.
Places of power.
Yeah, in places of power. Yeah. So yeah, it felt like, inadequate as I feel to be able to like speak on behalf of trans people, as it is for any person to speak on behalf of any entire community, I really felt it was important to just be very visible. I couldn't come out as trans non-binary until I knew that that was even an identity. And I only found out that that was an identity like 6 years ago when I went to Berlin, that mecca of gender queerness, and like met other trans non-binary people. And suddenly it was like everything fell into place. Like so much about the way that I felt forever about myself fell into place. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is me. Like how relaxing to finally feel like I belong, because there are other people who have had the same experience as me. There are whose experience matches so much in terms of how they feel about their gender, which was just magical to find. And so I guess I wanted to do that on a bigger scale. I wanted to represent trans people, particularly assigned female at birth, non-binary people, on a national platform. I mean, I was doing it anyway because I really believed that like, our leadership of the Green Party would be very exciting and very progressive at that moment. And then centering the transness was really just to be like, well, this is me. And yeah, we can do this. We can put ourselves out in public. And what I found was, which I guess it's so tricky because, of course, like I'm assigned female and women have this experience and have had this experience forever, is that I was held to a very high bar. And yeah, all marginalized people know this experience. It's like, how dare you come here and say that you want to take space in public? Yeah, it's tricky to know like whether that was because of transphobia or because of patriarchy, because people were reading me as woman or what it was. But like, definitely there was a very high bar. And I think, and it was interesting to recognize that. And luckily, you know, I have an incredibly supportive community around me, both like a queer community and also like I have like somebody that I love very deeply who I live with. Like that supportive unit meant that the kind of relentless, explicitly transphobic tweeting, etc., that I was getting, I could just kind of ignore, and the less explicit kind of being held to a very high standard and being held kind of accountable, and like that thing that was happening more internally from the Green Party, I could recognize it for what it was and just like stay strong and just keep saying like, this is just me. It doesn't need to be an argument. So yeah, I guess that's why I centered it, because it feels like in the current climate, the current political climate, which is a transphobic one, in the current media climate, that apart from anything, don't center it at your own peril. Like if I wasn't talking about it, someone else was going to talk about it. And I wanted as much as possible to control my own narrative and to talk about it in terms that were like liberatory and joyful and like expansive, rather than be talking about it in response to somebody saying something idiotic and transphobic.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
That was a lot. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because in politics and identity are always so interlinked, and you're whatever people see you are. I'm always a brown woman, you know, it's like, of course you're going to go in there with your identity, but I really hear you in that thing of then everyone's like looking at you with a completely different gaze and lens around how you articulate everything, and if all of everything in your life like adds up to values that are impossible to adhere within this capitalist system anyway, yeah, you open yourself up to a much more difficult time, which is why so many actually men that are gay don't tell people that they're gay. And that's like a much easier identity because they're a man, normally a white man anyway. And then it's like, oh, and they're gay. And that becomes, you know, like a whole thing of, oh, they wouldn't have been able to get there where they got if they had been open about that. And I think it's, you know, there are some identities such as race where you can't just hide it. And although people do try, I wonder if Priti Patel has looked in the mirror recently. But the other fellow Gujarati that's out there making me
terrifying.
Very confused.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's currently illegal to not say nice things about Conservative politicians or not.
It's not yet illegal. I think that's their next step.
So if you're listening to this in the future, this was recorded in the past. But what I want to say is, like, with an identity like trans, it is an identity that you can choose to show or not show, I suppose, in some ways. And so then choosing to show it is a great act of courage, because you're doing that. You are doing that for your community and for all of us, so that we can all become much more aware and actually catch up with like what's real about being humans, apart from what we've been told and indoctrined in.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I think like to be closeted, I think is intensely painful. And like, I mean, just from my experience of it, like with the being gay stuff when I was a kid, like it was just impossible. Apart from anything else, I wanted to kiss all the girls. So it was like, it was going to come out. But I think, yeah, from trans identity and just like, it is possible. Of course, it's possible to stay in the closet. My heart goes out to people who are doing that. You know, people have different reasons for needing to do that, and privileges, or like not having privilege is a really, you know, like a marker. Like I have so much more freedom to like be who I want to be than maybe other people have. And now that I live more freely, and I live in my body that I feel, that was really just there all along, and it completely confused me, these like breasts that I had. Like, it just didn't make any sense to me, and it was such a sight of dysphoria. Like, it was so painful having them. And now that I don't, and that, more and more I'm kind of living out my trans truth, it's like, it makes my heart bleed for people that don't get to do this for whatever reason. Many of those reasons there are so many reasons, including the prohibitive like waiting lists of medical transition and the costs associated with private care. It's like, it's a nightmare. Anyway, I will just say, I feel like the Priti Patel thing, it's like the gay man like example of staying in the closet so that they can succeed at capitalism. It feels like there's a kind of proximity to normativity, right? It's like Priti Patel, it feels like she just wants to be a white man, and like the gay man who pretends that he's not gay so that he can further his career, he just wants to be a straight man. And it's like that. It's like, instead of living into your truth, you try to be what is successful. And I feel like that was the standard that I was having cast on me from, trying to stand as a politician. It was like, okay, let's see how you do, but how you do is going to be decided on how much like a white man you can behave. Like, that's how we're going to, and so the standard that I was being held to was an impossible standard. It's like, I'm not a white man, I'm a trans white person. Like, I'm not going to be able to win that standard. And I feel like that's sometimes what you see with like marginalized, like people from marginalized communities in politics, kind of pretending, like really just going for that standard. It's like, okay, if you're going to hold me to a higher standard, I will be the worst white man ever, except they're not a white man. Yeah.
Or just so much effort, kind of having to be so meticulous in a way that's superhuman and beyond exhausting.
Yeah.
We were in the Rise Up to Reawaken conversation. In the Rise Up to Reimagine conversation that I had on the day before, there was a person there, Izzy McLeod, who was sharing that during the pandemic, because of the quietness and because of the not being in lots of social situations all the time, that they had the opportunity to realize their gender and to understand themselves as a trans non-binary person, which they hadn't been able to do because they were always around people that were projecting a gender onto them. I wonder if that's a common experience. It's interesting in itself that there were these lockdowns that took us out of a lot of social interaction, which gave all of us a chance to connect deeper with who we really are. And I wonder, for people that may have experienced a different understanding of their gender or of their sexuality, but especially of their gender, like, where might they be able to kind of find more community, that if they, don't happen to have friends that are also on that path?
Yeah, it's such a good question, because I think community really is what keeps trans people alive. In some ways, it's like you feel so alone as a trans person because you don't see other trans people anywhere. And when you do see them, you see these representations of them that are hateful. And obviously that does nothing for your self-regard or for feeling like welcome in the world. And so, yeah, I think community is kind of everything to trans people. And I encourage folk to go reach out to charity. So there's one called Gendered Intelligence, which is excellent and has, I think it has groups that you can join online. And I think that is something that's come out of the pandemic brilliantly, which is a kind of plethora of like online meetings and spaces which are being held by organizations for other people to go along to. There's one called Mermaids, which is specifically for trans youth. But I mean, if you got in touch with them and you're not a trans youth, but you're an older trans person, like over 25 or whatever, I'm sure they'd be happy to direct you towards places but I think Gendered Intelligence is a really good one for that. Like online, if you'd put like trans community into Twitter, there'll be so much going on and you'll be able to find people, which again is like this amazing thing that's, happened which kind of couldn't have happened without the internet, because trans people exist wherever they exist, but there are so many fewer of them than cis people. I think that's the thing as well, of like, you know, this kind of cultural war thing. It's like there's never been a world in which trans people have had a voice, and so suddenly it's like it's you know, people are like, oh wait, trans people are all like speaking. It feels like a war, like, you know? And it's like, well, no, they're not actually like declaring war on you, because like they'd lose. But what they're doing is they're just taking up a bit more space than they've ever taken before. And I'm sorry if that feels very uncomfortable, but like not actually sorry at all. So yeah, I think if you are alone and you're trans and you're finding that loneliness very painful, reach out, look out for trans communities, like reach out to me directly, and I'll try and put you in touch with community groups that can support you in your journey. My journey, I'll just say, has been the most wonderful like series of terrified acts of self-determination, and I'm so glad for every single one of them that I've made. I encourage trans people to take those terrifying acts.
Thank you. I have one last question, which is for you to share a call to action.
Yo, I mean, honestly, I'm just like, talk to your neighbor. Like, and if not your neighbor, like talk to someone, like make a connection. Like, I don't know like how this translates into a particularly useful political intervention, but I just think like we need to talk to people that we're not used to talking to. And like I guess that's another like danger of social media, is that you just end up talking to people who like sound like you, think like you, are a bit like you, and you know, like grow a friendship with someone unexpected and start thinking about who your community is, because I guess like the promise of community is not to leave anyone behind. And like that's really the mentality that we need to get into in the years that are coming. And so we need to kind of start practicing what that feels like and looks like.
Well, Priti Patel, if you're listening and you'd like to come for a beautiful walk, I could take you to the Chalice Well. We could make some prayers for humanity together. You are so welcome.
Amazing. I want to see that friendship happen. Transform politics by transforming Priti Patel.
And we're holding her up to a higher standard in this conversation than all of the white
all
men.
Of the rest. Yeah, exactly. It's very easy to do. We must stop doing that. I will try to stop doing that. Yeah.
I just feel particularly triggered about her partly because she's Gujarati and I'm Gujarati, and partly because I'm just so horrified by all of the border stuff.
What she's in charge of.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I'm horrified by that are happening with this particular government, but given the history of this country and being so much a part of the problem, to then be putting borders up in this way, in this completely illegal and inhumane way, it really hits me in a certain spot. You know, I also acknowledge that it's not the work of one woman, but of a whole system and machine and office full of many people, and all kinds of other pressures. But I do believe that trip to the Chalice Well could be fruitful for humanity.
Yes. Yeah, I hear you. It's an incredibly cynical government that gave her that role, and it's a horrific role that she is. Yeah. But please go with her. Please let her hear this intention of this podcast. Please find your way to Priti Patel's ears so that this extraordinary ceremony can take place.
And I'd also like to acknowledge in this conversation, because when you and I were in our early 20s, there was a time where I thought both of us would be in Parliament, and it seems much more likely stroke impossible now. And so I want to really acknowledge those that are in Parliament, that are doing really beautiful work and that are able to change the agendas even just a little bit. And also that we do have to find other places in which to create change. Yeah, as we've experienced with this particular government, it feels like it's going so far away from actually where we started this conversation, which is our climate emergency.
Yeah.
How would you like people to connect with you, Tamsin? You share your website and whatnot.
This is awful, I've just said in this conversation, everyone needs to get off Instagram, but I am most active on Instagram, maybe not for long, but right now that's probably the best way to reach out to me, connect with me. I think it's the only social media that I kind of regularly use.
And you do have a website as well, which we will share in the show notes.
Thank you. Oh yeah, read my book. I forgot about that. It's a beautiful thing. The longer it exists in the world for, the more proud I am for like the particular channel that I was at the point of writing it. It feels more and more relevant, which I guess it was always going to, because it's about how to deal with this crisis, and the crisis is getting worse and worse, but it's a good point of connection.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tamsin.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Amisha. It's such an enormous pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for listening and spending your time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. For less than a tea or coffee a day, you can access our community conversations and benefits such as our app and member gatherings, as well as being a patron whose support makes this podcast happen. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others find us. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.